Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions Wednesday mornings from 9 to 10 o'clock. We talk about some of the things that might impact you in your daily lives, some of the economic issues that you may have to deal with. And the show is primarily an economics show. The purpose is to kind of pull back the veil of some of the things that they make very complicated and try to make it a little bit more understandable so that when somebody is actually promising you a free lunch, you can understand that ultimately you're going to pay for it. There is no free lunch, and that's it should be the title of this show. There is no free lunch, but it is an economics program. It's a program to kind of clarify and talk about some of the issues that go on nationally, internationally, and how they relate. So that sounds pretty boring, but it is sometimes. So you can turn us off if you want, but you can also call in and join us, 220-9788, 220-WSTU. But it's the purpose is to kind of air out some issues that sometimes, and this is the political bent, that sometimes our politicians don't want you to know. They don't want you to they want you and think sometimes you are very stupid. And so they want to kind of keep you that way. And so I'm always amazed at some of the stuff that they try to foist on the consumer. And I'm just amazed at some of the things that they try to do. And frankly, yeah, a lot of the stuff it is stuff that unless you've got a financial background, an economics background, which a lot of people don't have, it may on face, it may make sense. It may sound right because some of these things, the answer that you get from an economic standpoint is not always logical. It's going to be consistent, but it's not always logical. And also it sometimes takes time for the result to occur. And in the economics world, that's not a day or a week or a month. We like instant gratification. And so sometimes when we do something, we say, well, what happened? Right after we look and we say, what happened? And we say, well, nothing. Okay, so that's good. Let's go. But it's kind of like a lot of things in our lives, and we understand this from a basic standpoint. Sometimes the effects of something aren't shown for years and years. If you haven't taken care of your health all of your life, you can say, well, I'm not dead, so it must not be a problem. And then all of a sudden, when you reach, 60 or 65 or 70, these things start creeping up, and you say, well, geez, what did I do? I didn't change anything. Well, yeah, you didn't change anything, but maybe you've been doing the right thing for the last 10 years, but you didn't do the right thing for the 30 or 40 before that. So sometimes there are consequences of our actions that we don't always like, but they happen, and so therefore, if we do certain things economically, we know we're going to get a specific answer that's going to be the same every time. It just may take shorter period of time or longer period of time to get the answer. We don't always see it. And again, with economics, some of those cycles are long-term cycles. They're 3, 5, 15, 20, 30, 100-year cycles. And therefore, it may be a long time before we really see the result, but we know we're going to get the result. And that's why it's really important for our elected officials who have access to the resources to give us an answer. It's important for us to trust them and understand that they're not lying to us or deceiving us in terms of how some of these things work. And the good thing about economic issues is that many of them have been resolved because we've been able to study economies for hundreds of years. So we can see what happened in, the Greek economy and the Roman economy. And we can see when we go, and we can see, what's happened in Germany or Russia or China or, the Middle East or whatever. We've had an opportunity to look at actions that have been taken and the impact of those actions. And and the effect of those actions. So it's kind of it really has been a situation that it gives us an opportunity to evaluate them, and things have been evaluated over a long period of time, and that's why we have the answers that we get. So the reason that economics is a science and not an art. It is one of those things that it's what's the saying about if I continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, that's kind of pretty stupid. And that's, and that is kind of sometimes what happens. The trouble is we don't do it. That statement, it's interesting because that statement is one of those statements where people is thinking, okay, I do it. I always picture, the hammer situation, and I hammer and I hammer and I hammer and I do it over and over and over again. I get the result. I finally get the nail in or whatever. So you think of more, it's immediate. I do it this time, and then I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again. But in economics, sometimes I do it, and then I don't see the result of it for about 10 years. Then I see the result of it, and then I say, well, that was stupid. And so I don't do it anymore. And then 20 years later, after I've forgotten about it, I do it again, saying, well, if I just do this, this is the answer I'll get. And then I get the same, it takes a little while, but I get the answer again. And then I say, oh, well, that was stupid. Let's not do that again. And then lo and behold, another 15 years down the road, somebody says, well, this is different circumstances. Let's do it now. And it's not different circumstances, and you get the same result. So that's the kind of thing that I think it's important to really fully understand. And there's a couple issues that anybody that knows that listens to the show that I harp on a lot, and I want to harp on it, again, because it is issues that I think are important. And once people understand the issue and how it actually works, the economics of the situation, I think that they then it's kind of one of those things where it's kind of an aha moment. You realize then when the politicians are lying to you, because what they're saying, has been tested numbers of times, and it's not going to give you that answer. It's not going to do what they, in the short run it will, but in the long run it will not. And again, this isn't a political philosophy, it's an economic result. But politicians love the short-term impact of certain economic decisions because I kind of equate it to drugs. Sometimes there's things that they do in the economy, and you get that short-term burst where you feel great. Everybody's great. Oh man, this is fantastic. I feel really good. And then all of a sudden, whoa, that didn't work out so well. And the downside of it is really, really bad. And so it's that high that they get on that the politicians want to give you, because let's face it, in the economic world, a political position is short term. It's even if that position is 50 years, 45, 47, 50 years, in the whole scheme of things, that's actually a short-term period of time for some economic situations, some economic cycles. And so therefore, there's this disconnect sometimes in the political arena, because they want the high, they want that short-term high, and they figure they can last through the bad things, and still retain some power. So you got to understand some of the motivations sometimes in what economic decisions are made or financial decisions are made, and what impact that has. So that's kind of the things that I want to talk about today, and a little bit on that. I want to talk a little bit about taxes, not income taxes and how you do it, but the whole economic impact of taxes. I was fortunate in college to have taken a graduate level economics class on that was called well, it was called taxes, and it was an economic tax class though, not an accounting tax class. So it wasn't about the tax laws and deductions and all of that. I took those in my accounting courses, so I had all the opportunity there. It was actually pretty interesting to take those classes from the accounting side, and then realize what the impact of those taxes were from an economic standpoint. And that was an eye-opening situation for me, because it allowed me to get past the idea that the purpose of the tax code is to raise revenue. It is not. A large portion of what we have in the tax code is designed to solicit a response from the individual primarily, but also business, to solicit a response that some political action wants. And it has nothing to do with raising revenue. We could raise revenue very, very efficiently and effectively without doing it the way that the system does, because a lot of the stuff that's in there is a social system designed to produce certain results, whether it's supplemental retirement for people over now 66 or 67 or whatever, whether it's Social Security and retirement, or whether it is subsidies for children, for low income subsidies, whatever the situation is. There are a number of items that complicate the tax code and make it less efficient, and aren't in there for raising money. Now, am I saying we should get rid of Social Security and we should get rid of all of these other things, these subsidies? No, but it would be better if we dealt with those outside the tax code, and within the tax code just focused on raising revenue to pay for all of that stuff. It would be easier to figure out what it's costing, and it would be a more consistent result, so that everyone would pay a fairer amount. You wouldn't be penalized because you weren't currently had a big family or small family or young family or old family, or that you made money or didn't make money, or that you owned a business or didn't own a business. Ultimately, all of that would be a lot simpler and a lot more level, kind of a level playing field. The funny thing is that generally that's not going to be accomplished through the income tax system. It's accomplished through other tax systems like sales tax and other things that can be accomplished easier. Then you get a better handle, and you have taxes that are out in the open. That's the other thing, is people can make better decisions if they know exactly what they're paying. I'm always amazed that you'd go into a store and you look at something and you see something on the shelf, and then the store clerk says, "You know what? You can't try that on. You can't look at it. You can't see what materials are in it. I'm not going to tell you how it's made. I'm not going to tell you where it's made. I'm not going to tell you anything about it. And by the way, I'm not going to tell you how much it costs. We've got a price tag on it, but that's not really the price. You're going to find out the price later. In fact, I'm going to have you find out the price a couple of years from now down the road. You'll then find out what the price was. Would you like to buy it?" Who buys that? Who buys that? But at the same time, our government constantly in the economic world implements things, and they say, "We're going to put this program in place. And, by the way, here's what it's going to cost." And, but that's not a given. And we don't know really how it's going to cost and how much it's going to cost. And we're paying for it in a couple different manners. We're paying for it through the tax system and credits and all kinds of things. And we're also going to pay for it in actual cash out of pocket. And everybody's going to have to participate. So, but we're going to vary how much it costs everybody based on what they want in the program or what they don't want in the program. And that's how it's going to work. And you know what? Down the road, we're gonna tell you what it all cost you. but we're sure up front here that it's going to save you money. And then it turns out that, it didn't, that it doesn't, that it wasn't what they said. In fact, it wasn't even, it wasn't even the system that they said. It wasn't even the way they're paying for it. It was exactly the opposite of how they said we were going to pay for it. That's the Affordable Care Act. I'm not saying the Affordable Care Act is bad. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying it was never explained to the people as to how it was going to be paid for. And I think that the politicians thought that it would never become obvious how it was going to be paid for. The whole thing with the Supreme Court ruling that it was a tax was a eye-opener for a lot of people. And I think they realized, they never realized originally that this was a tax and that it was going to be paid for as a tax, because everybody was telling them it's not a tax. And, conceptually, it was, there was some logic behind it, but I will tell you that you can't have a partial free enterprise system and have it work. It doesn't work. So as soon as any outside entity, whether it's a monopoly or it's the government, which is a monopoly, whatever it is, when they step into the economic arena and they take it over, they're the gorilla. So automatically economic principles are gone. When government is the sole supplier on one side of the equation, you will never, you will never have a fair price. Now, fair price isn't a low price. It's the price that it should be. Okay. So when I say from an economic standpoint that you will never have a fair price, that's an economic truth, that no matter what your intentions are, no matter how good those intentions are, no matter how hard you're trying to get a fair price, if you have one of the parties that is substantially stronger than the other and is dictating what the price will be because they are the sole buyer, or they're the biggest entity and have the most power, you will not get equilibrium, which is the definition of fair price. Equilibrium is the price at which a knowledgeable and large group of buyers and sellers would agree to buy or sell. But by definition, if there are not a large group of buyers and a large group of sellers with equal power and knowledge, you won't have equilibrium. And equilibrium is the definition of a fair price, even no matter how hard they're trying. If you have the government, for example, setting the price, and they set it at an artificially low price, you may think as a consumer, well, that's fair. I like that. But it's not fair to whoever is producing the product. And so what happens in that situation is you say, well, tough luck. Well, what happens is they go broke. They may continue on for a while. The government may subsidize them in some manner, but ultimately they go broke until one of two things happens. Either the number of suppliers is equal to the number of buyers, i.e. one. And at that point, you've got a monopoly on both sides. And then it's just a question of who's the strongest, which is usually going to be the government. And then that becomes a government-controlled business. At that point, they merge. There is no buyer and seller. They merge. The government will then own the manufacturing. They have to, because there's nobody that's willing to produce it at the price. So what will happen is the government will produce it at whatever price, but it'll have a cost to us. And we'll pay for it not as a prescription cost or a whatever cost. We'll pay for it as a tax someplace that you won't know about. And so when you look at it, you'll think, oh, I got a fair price, meaning I got a low price. So this is a good thing, not realizing that you're paying for it on the other side in taxes, in inefficiencies, in government overhead, and in all kinds of things that you're paying extra for, but that are hidden from you because you aren't being shown what those numbers are. And in fact, in some cases, the bureaucracy is so large that the political leaders don't even realize that they're paying those prices. They don't put the two together. Oh no, that's on something else. That tax is from some other benefit we gave them. But no, well, it's all to run the government. The larger and bigger the government becomes, the more that the government does, and the more services that they provide, the more costly the government becomes. And again, the government does not produce a product. So if the government goes in, all they do is reallocate resources. So when I say the government's going to take over the supplying of the drugs or of the health services or whatever the thing is, they're only going to redistribute. They're going to take wealth away from someone and redistribute it to someone else. In this case, they're going to take money away from the private market that is generating a economic return, that is generating an economic return, referred to as a profit, but not necessarily a profit like from an accounting standpoint. And they're going to turn around and give that to redistribute that to those people who have health issues. And again, they're not redistributing it to everybody, because really, if you're well and you don't need the insurance, you don't need the health care, you don't use those things, they're actually redistributing income from you because you're paying taxes to support a system that you don't need. That's probably the primary reason that most young people complain about the subsidized health care. They could care less. At 22 years of age, 25 years of age, nobody thinks they're going to get sick. Nobody thinks they're going to die. They don't think, and frankly, statistically, they're probably not going to have that many items. I mean, other than, potentially a birth of a child or medical care for their children, and again, at 20, 22, 25, a lot of people don't have children. They don't even have a spouse. So at that point, they're paying a lot for very little. That was a real surprise to the younger people that they were going to have to pay for all of this. And when I talk about economic issues and I talk about that the result may be long term, that's absolutely what's happening to the young people today. The young people have bought in to a system that is going to make them pay. They've bought into it because some politicians have convinced them that somebody else will pay. And they don't have enough knowledge of economics to understand that that's actually the case. So that they're going to pay. They're just going to pay for a long period of time. They're going to pay in a number of manners. They're going to pay because there's not going to be any Social Security or retirement for them. Now, the argument's going to be, well, you won't need that because we're going to give everybody an income for the rest of their life. No free lunch? Nope. Yep, that doesn't work. Economically, there is no such thing. I digress a little bit because I do that a lot, and say, think about this for a minute. If the government can actually dictate economic results, then why aren't they doing a better job of it? And I'll give you a perfect example. The minimum wage. If the minimum wage can be $15, why can't it be $150? Why can't it be $100? Why can't everybody have a high amount? Not the same amount at $15 or $12. Not, why don't, if all it takes is for us to dictate that number, why don't we just dictate that number to everybody? Why are we stopping at $15 an hour? I don't understand that. Why don't we make it, $100 an hour? Why doesn't everybody make $200,000 a year? There's no, if we're saying that this is the number that it should be, and it has nothing to do with what you're actually doing and what they can make, what you can make off of that labor, but is just a number that's fair, then let's make the number fair so that I'm rich. I don't want the number fair so that I'm not rich. Let's make the number fair so that I'm rich. I don't understand why the politicians don't make it 20 or 25 or 30. It's because they think we're not that stupid, right? Right? They think 15, they can rationalize 15. Well, that's fair. That's minimum. Everybody should get paid that. Well, how do you determine that? If you're not going to use economics and you're going to dictate it and just say, well, this is a number we think is fair or minimum or whatever, let's dictate it high. Let's make everybody wealthy. I don't understand it. If that is a possibility, then let's do it. But you see, it's not a possibility. That's what we really know, and the politicians know. So they lie to you a little, hoping you won't see that it's absolutely ridiculous on face. I mean, the whole concept of a fixed governmental set minimum wage is ludicrous from an economic standpoint, because if it was possible, then the government should make it as high as they possibly could. They should make it so that everybody in the United States makes $200,000 or $500,000 a year. Well, why don't they do that? Well, first of all, even if they redistributed all of the wealth in the world, in the United States, and we are a large portion of the amount in the world, if they redistributed all of that, we still probably wouldn't get to $200,000 a person. Second of all, they know if everybody is making the same amount, why should I do any more? And that is a bottom line. And you say, well, what about the rich people? You know, the people that, first of all, definition of rich, the government, it's $400,000. There's a lot of people who make $400,000, I don't think are sitting at home doing nothing. But that's the number we're shooting for. Everybody make $400,000. But now most of that, all of that comes from the economy. One way or another comes from the economy. That's where that income and wealth comes from. So some private enterprise in that economy has to make that. What incentive do I have to, for example, personally guarantee a loan for my business? Now, anybody that's in business here knows that if you're in small business, and small is, 50 million in sales or less, you're probably going to be personally guaranteeing a lot of stuff. You're going to personally put your name on. So if you're not successful, you are broke, bankrupt, you lose everything, right? Now, if I'm going to make the same amount as somebody who works for me that doesn't have to guarantee, or my partner who doesn't have to guarantee, or whatever, if I'm going to make the same amount of money as them, why do I want to do that? Why should I do that? If there's no opportunity for me to benefit from the risk, I'm not going to take the risk. And the only benefit is a higher income. I'm not going to have higher income because you're going to take that income and give it to everybody else. Think about that. I mean, when you think about things from an economic standpoint instead of a political standpoint, they just don't make sense. Some of the stuff that people are saying. I mean, it's just logical. We grew up knowing that, that you just can't, you can't create something just by saying it's so. If that were the case, I would have had a lot more puppies and I would have had a lot more things when I was growing up because I would have just said so. But that didn't work that way. My parents had to work for a living. They didn't have the money to provide all those things. And, so I made choices. And life is about making choices. And that's the thing that we're having a problem with today, is that it seems like our politicians are having difficulty making choices. And they just want to give everybody everything. And that's not possible. We know that. And that has historically been proven. Any society over time that has tried to give people everything and dictate the results has failed. So why do we do it again? Why would we try even components of it again when we know it's going to fail? Here's why. Because politically, it's going to succeed potentially in the short run. In the short run, it will be a good thing, because in the short run, I can get reelected because I can show what I did. Or I can get elected because I can show what I did. And I'll be long gone by the time it's over. And that is the issue that that's the issues that the United States has. It's the issue that all countries have. It's a issue that large companies have. And that is that the horizon for results is way, way smaller than the actual period of time that you need to plan for. So what we have in the United States politically, in business, in the large publicly traded companies, it's all the same. The CEO or the board members, or in some degree the stockholders, all of those are particularly interested in the short run. They don't care what's going to happen 15 years from now, because they're not going to own the stock by then. They're not going to be involved by then. They're going to be retired by then. So they care about what happens in the short run. So if I can get results in the short run that make me better off, whether I'm the president of the country or whether I'm Congress or whether I'm the CEO of a company or whatever gets me the most in the short run is all I really care about, because I'm going to be out in the long run. The fact is, though, all of these things are economic. All of these economic decisions are long-term decisions. They're not short-term decisions. So we need politicians who are willing to look out 15 years and say, this is the damage or this is the benefit that this action right now is going to take. Because right now, we're not seeing, and this is where I'm concerned, is that we're not able to make a good risk-reward decision at this point, because we're looking at the reward or the risk over a short period of time. So what's happening is we're looking at things that are being proposed and we're making decisions that are being proposed, and those decisions we're looking to see what the result's going to be in the next year, the next 2 years, right? And we should be saying, what's the result going to be in the next 15 years? Because if we're going to have a significant positive result in 15 years, the country's going to be much better off than where it is now. Economically, we're going to be much stronger. We're going to dominate it on a worldwide basis so that we're now the monopoly worldwide. If we're going to have the strength to dictate what happens and the reward of an economy that's gone up and expanded tremendously, we might be willing to suffer the recession or depression or whatever that comes with that. And that actually is the crux of the problem today, is that, and I'm going to fault younger people, although I have younger family members that, I think understand some of this, but the fact of the matter is that we have come to the situation that we don't feel like there's any consequence to our actions. And so therefore, and we feel like, we can do things and step in and make decisions, and there won't be any consequence to it, because, the government has tried to protect us from those things. So we now make economic decisions based on what's best for us, not necessarily on what's going to be best for us long term. It's best for us right now. So right now, I'm going to do something that keeps me from losing a job. But down the road, that's going to cost me a bundle, because potentially I'm going to be in a job that isn't going to exist down the road. So what I did is I saved a short-term income in exchange for a long-term result. And if I'm 25 years old, I may have made a really bad decision, because, right now I might make a whole lot of money now being a worker at McDonald's making $15 an hour, or being a history major or whatever. But if down the road there's no need for McDonald's employees or history professors, what am I going to do long term to survive? Okay, so for a year or two, I may have some discomfort and I may have some training, but I'm young and I can go through the training. But see, that's what happens when we manipulate the market. We create jobs that shouldn't exist. We create competitors that shouldn't exist. We create companies like Citibank and Bank of America and Chase. We created entities that should not exist. Now we're trying to regulate them. Now we're doing all these capital calculations so that they can have the correct amount of capital. So we won't have, that's garbage. There's no way those calculations are going to be anywhere near close. They're being manipulated behind the scenes. There's no way that the banks are going to provide the capital they need, because the number would be huge. If you're, for example, if I'm loaning money to Spain or France or Germany, how much in reserves do I need to put aside for that? I guarantee you that the banks are not putting enough aside for Germany to go bankrupt. And yet, economically, we know based on history that every capitalistic system or semi-capitalistic system at some point will fail one way or another. A depression, which means bankruptcy, so therefore the banks lose, or hyperinflation that creates a devalued dollar or a devalued currency where the banks lose because they're paid back with cheap dollars or cheap currency. Either way, the bank is going to lose a lot of money in that situation because it is a given economically that those countries at some point will experience a severe depression, recession, or hyperinflation that can only be recovered from by a partial bankruptcy. In other words, their GNP goes away, or by hyperinflation, which means that their currency isn't worth anything. And so if I have anything that's denominated in their currency, I'm never going to get paid back, or I'm going to get paid back with dollars that mean nothing or currency that means nothing. So at that point, we have to look at that and say, well, geez, what shouldn't you have reserves? What's the gross national product of Germany? You should have a reserve for that. If you're lending a large amount of that money, you should reserve all of that. So all of your international loans, to a large degree, should be reserved for. The only exception there potentially is, well, there's no exception. I mean, you really should be reserving a large amount, probably a large, for everything, because you're not going to get paid back. At some point, you're not going to get paid back. That's the other thing that's interesting about government entities. Very seldom do they reduce debt because they never reduce services. And the only way to reduce debt is to provide a level of services that you can pay for. And when you can't pay for it because you've had to stimulate the economy or whatever reason that politicians give for spending way more money than we have, you create a situation that you ultimately will always be a debtor until you can't pay. The worst borrowers in the world are foreign countries, and yet we loan tons of money to them for all kinds of reasons, because we feel like we're better or know better, or we're going to get paid. Yet in many cases, even foreign countries won't loan money to those foreign countries. They will look for somebody else to subsidize them. Whether it's the World Bank or somebody. So, I mean, it's just very simple when you really scatter out all of the garbage that comes in between and you compress 15 years into 2. When you start looking at when you say, okay, 2 years here, if my horizon is actually 15 years, you can see the economic results normally play out 15, 20, 50. You at least know what the outcome is going to be. And so, it amazes me that politicians continue to believe we are so stupid that they will continue to lie to us. But the fact of the matter is they don't want us to know. They don't want you to take an economics class. Is economics a mandatory class? No, it absolutely is not. Is finance a mandatory class? No, it is not. So there's a reason for that. The government wants you to understand civics because they want you to understand to some degree how politics work, because that's in their favor. They may want you to understand sociology. They may want you to understand psychology, but they don't want you to understand economics. They don't want you to understand statistics, because the unfortunate thing there is that those are sciences. They're not arts. And, there is a lot of art to some of the other social sciences. There is a lot more flexibility in those. There's not as many proven principles. There are, but there's not as many. And there's still a lot of unknown in those areas that people don't have a history on. Or there's a lot of fairly straightforward things that we can look back and say, this is what's happened. We're going to have these kind of things. We're going to have these kind of people. We're going to have these kind of social systems or whatever. This is what's going to happen. But the fact is, economics and statistics provide specific responses. It was like with the coronavirus. Nobody wants you to understand the statistics of the coronavirus, because then you would understand what it actually meant. And they wanted you to have the political aspect of it. So that's why nobody focuses on the statistics, and or hardly anybody. They focus on numbers. There's a difference between numbers and statistics. Statistics evaluate outcomes and give you a result of outcomes, and give you results of what the most likely outcome is or has been. It's either historical, this is what has happened, or it's predictive, this is what potentially will happen based on these numbers. Now, statistics is not a given because it's projections. Economics, on the other hand, is a given because we know that if you do this, you get this. It's just going to be when you get it. But it's interesting, like I said, statistically, and from a geometric standpoint, I've said for months now, when they talk about flattening the curve, they don't mean less people will get it. They mean less people will get it now. The same number of people, and that's where you have to understand the math. This is not following the science, this is following the math. And following the math is probably a little bit better than sometimes following the science, because sometimes the scientists don't have the answer yet. The math, we do know the answer. So if I look at it, this is basic geometry. If I look at a curve, a bell curve, that's what we all start with. A bell curve looks just like that, a bell. There's a certain number of people on the lower end, a certain number of people on the higher end, and in the middle is everybody else. And so if we look at that, that's what we're talking about. So if you look at something that we're all familiar with, grades, if I grade on the curve in a bell curve situation, there are equal number of A's and F's. There are equal number of B's and D's, and then there are a large group of C's. That's how a bell curve works. And that's how normally, that is the normal distribution of anything, is a bell curve. You're going to get, unless that is disrupted in some manner. So if, for example, I'm a teacher and I would say to the class, you guys are all at a graduate level, I know you have a certain number of, certain basic knowledge, and therefore I know that, you've already had an opportunity to drop out of the class. So I'm going to assume that all of the F's and most of the D's dropped out of the class. So I'm going to adjust the bell curve when I grade on the curve. I'm not going to give any F's and I'm not going to give any D's. I'm going to give more C's, B's, and A's. Right? Well, that's an arbitrary redistribution of the bell curve that teacher is doing. But as a result of that, you're not going to get the bell curve. You're going to get an adjustment to that. So you're going to get a result that isn't normal. It wouldn't be the normal result. But here's the thing. Even though I redistributed those and I now have more B's and more C's and more A's, still have the same number of people, don't I? All I did was change the shape of the curve. I cut off the back end of the curve and I made the front end a little higher and a little longer, right? Because I got more A's, I got more B's. So now I'm a little skewed to the front. Now I have half of a bell curve. I just have the front half of a bell curve. But there's the same number of people, right? Because I just decided not to give a certain amount of grades, but I still have the same number of people that are going to be impacted. That's the concept. That's the basic concept in flattening the curve. It's funny that he used that terminology. The people are the same. All we're doing is pushing them forward in the process. So we flattened it and pushed them out, but they're still going to get it. So statistically, how many people get it? That number was developed a long time ago, and we shouldn't care about it at all now because we know how many people are under the curve. Everybody in the United States is under the curve. We know that that's the case. So the question is not, and everybody under the curve is going to get it. I mean, really, that's the concept. Okay, well, originally there would have been a certain number of people that didn't get it at all. There would have been a certain number of people that, got it a little bit. There would have been a certain group that got it normal. Then there would have been a group that would have gotten it bad. And then there would have been a group that got it really bad. And statistically, within those groups, there would be subsets. And of the group that got it really bad, there would be a subset of those that passed away, that died. All right. There would also be a subset of those people who could have lived but couldn't get care because hospital beds were filled. Right. So by flattening the curve, what we tried to do is lower the number of people who would need hospital care, not who would get it. And that's where we made the mistake. We lowered the curve. We flattened the curve of all possible people that would get it to a level below hospital capacity. As we're seeing now, that really doesn't make any difference. That hospital capacity isn't needed for everybody who's going to get it. It's needed for those people who are going to get it severe enough, that are in that far group. The subset of that group that's going to get it severely are the ones that are going to need that care. And there's where we should have flattened the curve, is what we should have worried about. And the curve itself could have been higher. It's not necessary that the top of the curve was under the hospitalization rate. If you think about what I'm talking about here, the top of the curve could have been higher than that, because the people who were going to get it in that top of the curve were not going to get it seriously enough to go to the hospital, because there was a large percentage of people who were not going to get it seriously enough to go to the hospital. Asymptomatic, weren't even going to get it, so they knew they had it at all. So that's where we didn't listen, and we didn't look at the statistics. We didn't look at the numbers. Unfortunately, that's what we did. And so it's important to look at those kind of things and to understand what we're dealing with. And it's the same thing in economics. It's important to understand what the outcome is going to be and what it really means when we talk about an economic output. So, like I said, two of the things, and I'm kind of running out of time, but I wanted to at least go through the basics to set this up. But, there are, two things that are going to be a given, and that is that we are going to be looking at either inflation in some manner coming up, or a depression. The economy has to reset. It hasn't reset. We're going to be looking at something, and we'll talk about that next week, and I'll kind of give you some input into some of that or my thoughts on it. I appreciate you joining with me today, and hopefully thinking about some of the things we talked about, understanding a little bit of the concepts of what's going on, whether it's mathematically from a geometry standpoint and the flattening the curve, or economically with what's going on. But hopefully you'll join me again next Wednesday right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We're Martin County's Heritage Station.